Hello guys and girls, and welcome to today's lesson. As you can see on the screen, our topic today is context clues, but you're going to notice this actually says context clues review. And the reason that we are calling this a review is because we started talking about context clues last week. We watched a brain pop video, we filled in a graphic organizer about context clues together, and we also did an HMH lesson over context clues. So this is something that you have at least heard about before, but today we're going to be diving in a little bit deeper, and when this video is over, we're also going to be doing some practice with context clues today. Couple of things before we get started. You should have a note-taking sheet. If you do not have one, please let me know ASAP so we can get that to you. And you will be taking some notes as we go through this today. And I'll also go ahead and give you a warning up front to let you know that this Edpuzzle today does have some questions built in that you're going to be expected to answer. And I am going to be taking a grade on this Edpuzzle. So super important that you make sure you are paying attention, following along. Since this is a video, there is this wonderful feature that allows you to rewind and rewatch. So if you come up to a question and you are just really unsure about what the answer is, my advice would be to maybe take the video back a minute or two, rewatch, and see if that can help you figure out what the correct answer is to the question. With all that being said, let's go ahead and jump in and get started. So first thing I would like to know is, what do you typically do if you are reading a passage and you come across a word that you do not know the meaning of? So if you're reading something, you get to a word, maybe it's a word you've never seen before, or you have seen it, you just don't know what it means. How do you typically handle that situation? Go ahead and answer that question now. So I'm just going to go ahead and tell you my experience. When I was growing up as a young student, really before I got in middle school, it was mostly in elementary school, I really struggled with reading. I was not a great reader, and it was something that I really had to work hard on, to the point that now I teach kids how to read. So if you are like me and reading is a little bit of a challenge for you, I want you to know that you are not alone. You are in good company, because I was right there with you. But back in the day when I would struggle to read, if I came across a word I didn't know, my tendency was to just skip that word and hope it wasn't super important to the passage. And sometimes that worked out just fine, but sometimes it was also an issue. And as we are getting older, right, you guys are 8th graders, soon you're going to be headed over to the high school. Reading passages that are difficult to understand or are above your grade level is going to be something that's going to happen maybe a little bit more than it has in the past. And so it's going to be important to make sure that we have tools that we can use when we do come across those words that maybe we don't understand very well, to help us figure out what those words mean. And that's the whole purpose of what we're talking about today, which is context clues. There are 4 different types of context clues that we're going to talk about today. And by the way, just a refresher of what we talked about last week. When I say context clues, what I'm talking about are the words in a passage that you can use to help you figure out the meaning of an unknown word in a passage. So remember, context is something's surroundings. So if you come across a word that you don't know the meaning of, you can use context clues, or the words around that unknown word, to figure out what that word means. And that's what we're talking about today. The first type of context clue that we're going to go over is called a definition or an explanation clue. With a definition or explanation clue, these appear near unfamiliar words and they tell you what the word means. This is my personal favorite type of context clue, if you can find them, because they literally right there in the text just give you the definition of the unknown word, and we'll look at some examples of that in just a second. But some key words that you might see in a passage that are going to let you know, hey, a definition or explanation context clue is coming up are that is, which is, or meaning. So if you see one of those words or one of those phrases around an unknown word, that might be a clue that a definition is coming up for that word. And then there's also some punctuation that can show you that maybe a definition or an explanation clue is coming up. And that's going to be commas, colons, which are these two dots on top of each other, semicolons, or dashes. And again, we're going to look at some examples of that in just a second, but please make sure you have all the notes copied that you need from this slide before you move on. So here are some examples of definition context clues. Our first one says, seahorses have prehensile tails, tails that allow them to grasp things, helping them hold seaweed and hunt for food. Now, to be completely honest, I had never heard the word prehensile before I created these slides for you. That is a word that I have no idea what it means, but luckily for us, there is a definition context clue here where it tells us a prehensile tail is a tail that allows them to grasp things. And notice it's got these dashes. So that was one of the key punctuation that we could look for if we're trying to figure out the meaning of an unknown word. If we see those dashes, that might be a good clue to us that that is the definition for that word. Another example says, Nelson Mandela was the first black president of free South Africa. He became president in 1994 after the fall of apartheid, a system of racial discrimination. Now you guys might have noticed I even kind of struggled to pronounce this word because this is another one I've not seen before. I do not know this word. But again, context clues give me the meaning of the word. I see a comma here, which was one of our key punctuation marks, and it tells us that this word means a system of racial discrimination. So again, the best part about these type of context clues are it literally gives you the definition right there in the text. So I would like to know, what clue do you see in this example sentence that lets you know that a definition context clue is coming up? It says, the hunter-gatherers in ancient times were nomadic, meaning they traveled and lived from place to place. What is the clue that should stand out to you here? Hopefully you chose the answer that said that there is a comma and there's the keyword meaning. Remember, the comma was one of the key punctuation we expect to see with this type of context clue, and then meaning was one of our keywords. So nomadic means traveling and living from place to place. Our next type of context clue is one that we did talk about a little bit last week, and those are synonym or restatement clues. With these type of context clues, you'll have an unknown word, and in the sentence, it will either give you a synonym, so a word that means the same thing as the unknown word, or sometimes they'll just say the word in a way that's easier to understand. Our keywords with our synonym or restatement clues are that is, and, or in other words. And then our key punctuation are commas, semicolons, and dashes. So you're going to notice that some of these repeat from the last type of context clue that we talked about. Before we look at some examples of this, please make sure you have your notes copied down for this slide. So some examples of restatement or synonym context clues are, in 2017, fidget spinners took the world by storm. Fidget spinners are meant to keep your hands busy, as well as being a fun hobby. Soon they became ubiquitous, appearing in the hands of children everywhere. Oh boy, do I remember the fidget spinner days. Our unknown word here is ubiquitous, and I see a comma, which was one of the clues that we had for this type of context clue. And what this sentence does is it tells us what ubiquitous means by restating it in an easier way to understand. So ubiquitous means appearing everywhere. If something is ubiquitous, it appears everywhere. So again, this is a synonym or a restatement clue because it tells us what ubiquitous means, but in different words. The doctor consulted with his coworkers, asking them what they thought about the patient's strange symptoms. So our unknown word is consulted. I do see a comma again, which remember was one of our key punctuations. And it restates consulted here by saying that consulted means asking the thoughts of others. So again, comma, unknown word is consulted. It tells us that in words that are a little bit easier to understand. What clue do you see in this sentence? During the Great Depression, families needed to be frugal and careful with their money. So you might want to look back at your notes that you took just a second ago. What is the clue here that shows us that a synonym or a restatement context clue is coming up? Choose your answer now. So it has the keyword and. Hopefully that's something that you noticed when you were selecting your answer. It tells us that frugal, a different way you could say that is careful with money. Our next type of context clue is an antonym or a contrast clue. These clues present the opposite meaning of a word in a text. We don't have any key punctuation here, but we do have several key words that you might see in a passage to let you know that an antonym or contrast clue is coming up. Those keywords are but, unlike, however, although, while, and on the other hand. Please make sure you have your notes copied for this slide before you move on. So some examples of our antonym or contrast context clues are, unlike the boisterous students in their class, Grace was quiet and liked to follow the rules. So our unknown word here is boisterous. We have the keyword clue, unlike. So Grace is the opposite of boisterous. Grace is quiet and she likes to follow the rules. So if she is the opposite, then boisterous must mean loud and someone who does not like to follow the rules. Liam was more hopeful that his parents would finally let him adopt a puppy, but his brother was more pessimistic. Our unknown word here is pessimistic. We have the keyword but, and then Liam is the opposite of pessimistic. So Liam is hopeful, so the opposite of that must be unhopeful, or maybe you think it's not going to happen. So this is another example of an antonym context clue. What clue do you see in this sentence that lets us know that there is an antonym or a contrast context clue? As the city was developed and forests were destroyed, deer became scarce. On the other hand, there were still many squirrels throughout the city. The key words here are on the other hand. It tells us that deer are scarce, but squirrels are the opposite of that. So if there's a lot of squirrels and that is the opposite of scarce, then scarce must mean that there's not very many of something. Our last context clue that we're going to talk about today are called inference context clues. These are probably the trickiest because you have to take all of the information in the passage into account when you're trying to figure out the meaning of unknown words using inference context clues. It tells us that to best use these clues, you have to read the entire passage. You have to pay close attention to the sentences before and after the sentence where you have the unknown word. And you also have to pay attention to the mood and the tone of the passage. Please make sure you have your notes copied down from this slide before you move on to the examples. Many jobs that we know today will someday be taken over by robotics. For example, you may have seen the self-checkout lanes at grocery stores. These machines do the jobs that people used to do, making many human cashiers obsolete. The unknown word here is obsolete, but to really figure out what that means, you have to look at all of the sentences here. It tells us that there are a lot of jobs today that are being taken over by robots. It gives us the example of self-checkout lanes at grocery stores, and it says that these things make human cashiers obsolete. So if we know there's more robots doing the job of humans in grocery stores, humans are becoming obsolete. That must mean that obsolete means there are less people doing this or that it's really unneeded. What clue in the text helps you determine the meaning of the underlined word? For years, people have been advocating that America should eliminate the penny. They think it is not worth enough money to have a real purpose. What clues do you see in this phrase here that can help you figure out what the meaning of the word eliminate is? Hopefully you identified this sentence. They think it is not worth enough money to have a real purpose. We can tell here, based on the words that are used, that eliminate is getting rid of the penny. They think it's not worth enough money, and so that means they think we need to get rid of it.